Or, oh, okay. Cool.
And he started the stream just as he said that.
I'm gonna say the first thing I said was that, but no, they couldn't hear me a second ago. So
They could hear Eric and I.
yes, they could do that.
Right.
So
The internet is for book club. The internet is for book club.
The internet is for book club. Is that what you said?
Oh. Yes.
Let me tweet out that we are live. Let folks know. Not that we usually get many people hanging out with us on book club, although Fred's usually there. Or what?
He's got game nights now.
Can. Oh yeah. What's he playing?
D&D with the work crew.
With people from work. Yeah, virtual. Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say because work is in Boston, right?
Yeah.
So it would be hard for them all to meet face to face.
Could you imagine me trying to record while a D&D game was going on?
I mean, are you not doing that right now?
Well, I mean, if they
were in the house. I suppose, yes. I was thinking maybe he could run down to Boston, once a week or whatever for game night.
Well, then I couldn't record because of Freddie.
Oh, Freddie. Freddie's fine.
Freddie.
He can take care of himself. All right, so we have apparently 13 options for books that a series that we have started that we haven't finished. I don't know how much interest I have in all of them, but
yeah, no, I basically went out and I was like, let's go see how many and how we started.
And I was like, there was one that you all read, and I was in the middle of like dissertating or something and never did get to. Was that Baron Nightingale?
Yes, the Baron Nightingale, the Winter Night.
Is that a series?
Yeah, the Winter Night, and the second one's the Girl in the Tower.
Okay, so there's another one that if we ever decide to continue that one, I have to go back and listen to book one as well. So.
Yeah.
So my inclination is towards Dragonlance, Prism Pentad, or the Orisha series, the Tome Adeyemi follow-up to Children of Blood and Bone. And I don't know that is a 2-book series, but I think there's only 2 books out at this point. So that's one where we could just keep up with it as they come out. If we do Dragonlance, I think I want to definitely consider the second series to be part of it as well, because I don't feel like, I don't know, in my reading experience, thinking back to my middle school days, I didn't feel like the first 3 books was really the entirety of the story. You needed the next 3 books to really get the rest of the story. Was that Legends, I think? So
yeah, for Orisha, the 3rd book is untitled,
but there is another book coming at some point. So
yeah.
So what are you all thinking?
I don't know.
No preference?
I wouldn't say that, but I just don't know.
Well, what's your preference then?
Yeah.
Tell me the options that I've given are bad, and which one you want to read.
Well, it's tell everyone, right?
I suppose. Do you want me to pause the stream?
What was the non-Dragonlance one that's also still has a book out? Prism Pentad. Which one is that?
That's
even?
the Dark Sun.
That's the Dark Sun one.
Oh, okay.
Which I believe you read the first one. I don't think you.
Oh, did you not read the second one, the Crimson Legion?
The army going to, with Rickus going to. So from what I recall, it was just when we recorded, it was just Jeff and I.
Okay.
Right.
And I believe you were busy. You had stuff in life, and that's
right.
Which is perfectly fair. Yeah. So
Teos wants us to read Prism Pentad, but that's his vote for what it counts as.
Yeah, Teos voted for that. He's a Dark Sun fan.
Wait, we're not going to read all 5 books, are we?
Well, I thought that was the idea, was that we're going to try to start wrapping up some series.
I just I don't really like either of those options.
Okay,
to be honest.
which one? Then what?
That's
But
fine.
that doesn't mean.
Then
I think I would probably take Dragonlance over Dark Sun.
okay.
But
Would you rather go to the Orisha book next, and that way we just sort of keep up with that series as it comes out?
wait, is there a third one already out? I thought it
No,
wasn't out.
there's a second one out. We haven't read the second one yet.
So we could just read that second book, and then
Right.
then go to finish.
And that delays having to make a decision on the next big series for another couple of months.
I'm just gonna be upfront and honest. I'm not gonna read Dragonlance or Dark Sun back to back.
Okay. Well, we could break that up too. Maybe we cycle through both of them, or break it up with some other things too.
Here's the list of I'm putting it in the chat of our chat. The list of all the books that
that we haven't read yet.
that we have either the second or third of the series, because there's only two series that we're at the third, which is the Prince Mentat and Dragonlance Chronicles. Technically for Dragonlance, that is the third one is the last of the series. So yes, there is Dragonlance Legend, which is technically a different series, but which is highly connected. But
Oh, I didn't like the Earthsea book either. What is that one?
which one?
What is the Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne? What was book one of that? I don't remember that. The Richard Lee Byers one?
Yeah.
Oh no, that's
no. That's a Brian Staveley one. It's I believe the Emperor's Blades. I believe it was called the first one.
I don't remember that one. I don't remember reading the brother. Is it Brother or Brotherhood of the Griffin? I don't remember reading book one of that either.
Some of them are a while. I mean, some of them we just read the first book, and
Yeah. Because that was one I was interested in.
Most of them we just read the first book.
That was one. The Brotherhood of the Griffin one was one I was interested in for a few years, and then never. I don't remember ever getting to reading one, so I don't remember. It's been a while. Some of these.
Yeah, I'm just rechecking for the one you're saying. Where is it?
So Tracy, which of those sounded the most interesting to you?
The Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne. That first book was Skullsworn.
From the Unhewn Throne? Okay.
Yeah. Skullsworn was the first one.
I should just look things up, and then I don't have to try to remember my name.
Oh, that's the one where the assassin and the assassin, the priestess of death and all that, and falls in love.
Is that?
Yeah, where she has to 10 days to kill 7 people.
Okay, that's not the one that got.
That she loves.
There was one that we read that got particularly, I guess, graphic would be the way to describe it, in the final fight scene. But that wasn't that one. Okay. Because that was also kind of about an assassin or something, wasn't it? Do you know what I'm talking about, Tracy? No.
Because, what is their captive flame?
So, if we don't go straight to the second group of 3, we could at least be able to check one off if we read Dragonlance.
Okay.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
I guess that's also technically true with Prism Pentat, because we're on the third book of
Prism Pentat is a series of 5.
It's like a 5-book series.
5 books, that's right.
So
we could cross off a series, I guess, given the options before me.
Or we could go with something new.
Yeah, but I don't know.
We started a new trend with Magnus Chase of trying to cross some series off the list. So
Shadowed Sun, the number 2 for the Dreamblood series, that's only a duology. That's only 2 books. So that's
That's also
also
only
a
2.
one. That's also a 2. So that if we wanted to scratch that series, we only so
That was the one where I didn't really like the first one, though.
yeah, we were not.
So, I mean, I could.
One.
I
So
will
what
read
I'm
it
hearing-
if Tracy will read Dragonlance with me.
So what I'm hearing is we should do Dragonlance right now because it's been a little while. I mean, although you did pick Magnus Chase too, but then we can read
No,
Dreamblood
Fred
2.
picked Magnus Chase.
Well, but what I was saying was that you were reading it with your
Oh, okay.
kid, and thus you wanted to continue to just finish the series.
Okay, sure.
And technically speaking, I Strad would be finishing off that series, but because there's only 2 books.
But the
in
first one
Istrad.
also stands alone pretty well. You don't really.
Exactly, and I think the second book's supposed to stand alone too.
So.
But yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing we do Dragons of Spring Dawning this time, and then we read Dreamblood number 2 next time.
Yes.
Okay. I will add.
And I'm now going to be pickier about which first books we pick.
Well, at this rate, if we're going to finish all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we need to finish all of them. I think we.
No, I don't think because like I said, most of for all the ones
Right.
except for the Prince Bandai and Dragonlance, we've only read one book.
Right.
So if we're like, really, we don't want to continue the series, we can just scratch it out and remove it, and we don't want to.
I think that's fair. I think the whole idea of continuing on with series, like we did with Magnus Chase, is that we are going to be in the habit of reading what we want to read and not being so concerned about breaking things up and not inundating people with the same thing over and over again. So
Yeah. I mean, if we're enjoying.
So honestly, Tracy, if Dragonlance is not something you want to read again, then let's not read it. That's okay too.
I'm okay with reading this one. I don't know if I want to do another
Do the
3.
other 3. Well, and the second series
But yeah,
has at least some questionable stuff in it. So.
For Dragonlance?
Did I read number 2? I wonder if that's the one I started and didn't get a chance to finish, because I think we did it fairly recently, right?
It wasn't too horribly long ago. I don't remember.
It might have been when my mom was sick the first time.
Yeah.
Or actually, it could have been over the summer when I was moving, because I remember listening to a Dragonlance while I was packing, I think.
When did we watch it? When did we read Dragonlance? Recently.
I am setting up my cart on Audible.
We read it last summer, May, June. Is when
As often as we do a book club, last summer wasn't that long ago, right?
it was May, June that we did the recording. So just
Okay.
was that when you were moving, Tracy?
Yeah, because I started living in the shed at my parents' in June.
Yeah.
And so I would have been packing stuff in May.
Okay.
So that probably is the one
That you missed.
that.
So are you gonna just jump to book 3 and see how it goes?
Yeah, and I mean, I do have book 2, so I could always listen. I think I got halfway through or something. So
Yeah, and then according to the website for the recording was just you and I, Jeff. So,
Okay, so I went ahead and added the 3rd book of Dragonlance. I added The Shadowed Sun. I've added Children of Virtue and Vengeance, just in hopes that we get back to that sometime. It's only important because Audible has a special going on right now where if you order, if you use 6 credits, then you get $20 to buy something else. So I'm going to use 6. I've saved up 8 credits, so I'm going to use 6 of them all at once. So this is basically, I'm using up all my credits for, I want to plan out everything we're going to read pretty much the rest of the year until I get more credits.
Yeah. So the plan is we're going to do with Spring Dawning.
Spring Dawning, and
Yeah.
then I guess in my head, A Shadowed Sun, and then Children of Virtue and Vengeance.
Okay.
Does that sound like a plan for the next half a year, Tracy? You're not
Sounds
allowed
good.
to change your mind later. Okay.
In my view, you can change your mind. Just,
Yeah, I'm joking.
you can adapt.
Yeah, we can adapt. Okay, very good. Well, should we go ahead and get started with... Oh, I should change the Dragon of Spring Dawning, right? Dawning by... Weiss and Tracy Hickman.
Have they released dates on the new books yet?
Which books?
Aren't there new?
Or
Dragonlance?
Oh.
Dragonlance.
I don't know.
I know as part of our news team, I should know this, but I forget. I'm a concept person.
You're the big picture. You're the idea person.
So is there books on that list, series on that list that we want to remove, or that we're not seeing that going back to?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know there's things I'm not as interested in, but I'm willing to read things if other people want to. If other people want to read more Ursula K. Le Guin, I will make that sacrifice. Or what else do I remember? I don't remember the Crescent. Oh, it was Crescent Moon. Was that the one with like the zombie things and yeah?
Yep.
Okay, that one was okay.
That was the first one.
So yeah, I don't know. If you got that list in a handy spot, you might hang on to it, and then we can trot it out in half a year when we're and have this conversation again.
Yeah.
And Jeff has more credits.
I won't have more credits till like December, but yeah, I'll have 2 left after I use 6. So
Right. Oh, do you have to do it all?
yeah,
at once?
I started doing it all at once because they were offering deals where it was like half the price.
Oh yeah.
So all right, should we get going? We've got at least one person hanging out with us on the stream. Just hey, Dave, just watching us chat about what we're gonna read next. All right. Well, shall I hit record and we can get going?
Sure.
I am recording.
This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by our super supportive patrons. You can join them over at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome Book Club for April of 2021. The Tome is a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Tracy Hurley.
And I'm Jeff Greiner. In each book club episode, we discuss one D&D related book. Spoilers be damned in full book club style. That is a tricky phrase to say. And our book this time around is The Ship of the Dead by Rick Riordan, which gives you a sense of just what we mean when we say D&D related, because it is not, but kind of is.
And with us, as always, is Eric Paquette.
Hello, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Next episode, which we'll record towards the end of June, we'll be reading Dragon of Spring Dawning by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman in a Tome Show book club first, because we're focusing on...
Oh.
Ah.
What did I mess that up? Leave something in that I shouldn't have?
Hi, Sam.
Hey.
Is it Sam?
What's that?
How about just...
Technically, it's not even the first, because we already finished one series.
Right, I think that's because that's the script I just copied and pasted from the previous script. Does that part make sense?
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've finished other series before, but... so.
Next episode, which we'll record towards the end of June, we'll be reading Dragon of Spring Dawning by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, because we are focused on finishing some of the series we started over the years.
And before we get started, I want to say thank you to all of our Tome Show patrons. You are the way that I pay the Tome Show bills, and that helps keep it going. That helps me convince my wife to allow me to take the time to do this and what have you, because it is a hobby of mine that basically pays for itself at this point. If you want to join those patrons, even for $1 a month, you can head over to patreon.com/The Tome Show. Now on to the book. We have read The Ship of the Dead by Rick Riordan. It is book 3 of the Magnus Chase series in the Riordiverse.
Full of toenails.
Full of toenails, yes.
As is per legend of the ship.
Yeah, Naglfar or whatever it was called, right? So this is book 3. We followed Magnus Chase through 2 books. If you know Rick Riordan stories with Percy Jackson and that kind of stuff, or Percy's probably the most famous. It very much is Percy Jackson, but with Norse mythology, right? It's he's the Magnus Chase is the son of a Norse god and dies and goes to Valhalla, where he hangs out with a bunch of other children of Norse gods, and they become the Inheriar that will fight the battle of Ragnarok when the world comes to an end. And so far, we've seen them stop Ragnarok by rebinding Fenris Wolf. And then in book 2, unsurprisingly, if you're familiar with Rick Riordan's sort of formula, Ragnarok is threatened again, and Loki escapes and is going to start Ragnarok. And then this book is Loki starts Ragnarok when he sets sail in his ship made out of, was it fingernail clippings, toenail clippings, both? I don't know. Nail clippings, a boat made out of nail clippings. The Ship of the Dead. And when it sets sail, when the ice melts in the summer, then that's when Ragnarok begins. And so they need to go and recapture Loki before the ice melts and the ship sets sail. Did I miss anything? That's pretty much the whole book, right?
That's all.
Done.
I had a quick question, though, because you did mention the pattern of Riordan's writing, and like we talked about a little bit each episode. But it seems to fit Norse mythology well.
Sure. I mean, in fairness, it fits a lot of mythology and a lot of storytelling. Like it's not an uncommon. It's not like he picked his own formula that's different than all other storytelling and just does it over and over again. I have found in the past reading his books that he leans on it heavily enough that it becomes a little bit predictable. But that's fine too. That I still enjoy the ride. So
yeah, it's just, I mean, I grew up reading a lot of like Greek and Roman myths, and you do get some of that sort of like everything's going to go to heck, but not always to the same way that I feel like you get it in Norse mythology.
Yeah, well, and yeah, I mean, Norse mythology. Most of my experience with Norse mythology is either from the Neil Gaiman book that we read or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? So that's most of my familiar with Norse mythology. But it does seem to lean on that pretty heavily as a thing in story.
And the world's almost always about ready to end.
Well, and
right?
it's right. Well, and that's the thing about Ragnarok, right? Is that you can't stop it; you can just delay it, and so they're constantly just delaying it. And it's, I mean, it's not really that different than like this is the formula that the original Star Wars trilogy follows too, right? Everything's gonna go horrible, and then you stop it, and then you don't, and then you stop it again, right? So I mean, it's a fairly common formula.
Yeah.
So anyway. this in this story they start off knowing that this is what they have to do. It leaves off on the cliffhanger from the previous book, where they know the bad guy's gotten away, and now you've got to go stop him from starting the end of the world.
Yeah, Odin had given them a task to go and, well, at least, what's her name?
Samir?
Alex. Yes, Samira. Sam. She's given a task by Odin to basically capture Loki.
Right. Which, I don't know. That's fine to be, it's part of, heroic storytelling to be given a quest or whatever. But at the same time, like, I kind of got the impression they were all going to go do that anyway. They didn't really need Odin to tell them to go. They were planning on, because they feel some responsibility because they were there when he was freed.
Do they really need Odin?
I mean, he doesn't. He's not a very influential figure in the story.
Wait, he's got PowerPoint.
Yeah, and his self-help books.
Yes, inspirational speaker.
Yep. Although I would argue he's probably more useful than, was it Heimdall, who just spies on people and takes selfies.
Yeah, but they so one of the things they have to go and find, right, is the mead.
Kvasir's mead, yeah.
Yeah.
So they come to the realization, like, at first they're like, well, we're not quite sure how we're going to do this. We're not quite sure what's going to happen, but let's get on the boat. They were given a boat by Magnus's father, who is Frey, the god of summer and peace and what have you. And so, of course, it's a giant yellow boat.
The big banana.
They call it the big banana. And so they basically set sail with the idea of, like, okay, I guess let's just start going to where we need to go, and we'll figure out what we're going to do and how to stop them later because we're running out of time.
And doesn't it fold up into a napkin?
Oh. Yeah, napkin or like a handkerchief. Yeah.
And Eric, did you say it worked last time?
Yeah, it worked last time for them. Just figuring out as they go along.
And that's another thing that oftentimes is the case in these kinds of stories, right? Like we know we got, and honestly, it feels a little bit D&D-ish to me as well. Like sometimes, like you got to go deal with a thing, so you just go and figure it out on the way, right? Because almost certainly the way D&D adventures and Rick Riordan books are set up is that along the way adventures will be had that will just happen to provide you with the solutions to your problems, right? So maybe Odin was playing Dungeon Master the whole time and setting up the pieces and what have you.
Get the MacGuffin.
Right. Go get the MacGuffin. Well, and so, yeah, so they headed from Boston to England. And I guess there was, for those people who enjoy the other Rick Riordan books, there was this nice opening scene of Percy Jackson and Annabeth were there, and Percy was trying to train Magnus because they knew they were doing a sea voyage, and he's the son of a sea god, so he was there to sort of help him, train him, get him ready, which didn't really seem to help at all. Like Percy's training was like, well, that was nice, but I'm not getting it, and it turns out it didn't really matter that much. There was a scene right at the end where Magnus was plunging into the ocean, and you just sort of, that whole opening with Percy was just a setup for that joke at the end where Magnus is falling into the water and remembers to clench his butt or whatever it was. Right. So.
Plus, we got the scene with Jack flirting with Riptide.
The sword, yeah. Yep. So they started off just on their way, and they knew there was potential for trouble because they had pissed off a sea god in a previous book, and so they didn't end up running into that sea god, but they did run into that sea god's husband and daughters, who swallowed them up in the waves and took them to their feast hall. Mead hall, I suppose, is probably better because that was the giant that made the mead, wasn't it?
But they captured them because they were talking about mead,
Right.
and thought that the dad would be
Yeah.
interested. So yeah.
That makes sense. So yeah.
And they
Go ahead.
And they said that it's okay. They can get guest privileges as long as nobody is Magnus Chase.
Right. Yeah. Because the idea of guest rights comes up a lot. Whenever they end up with giants or whatever, there's always this idea of like, well, we can be protected if we claim guest rights, right? It feels a little bit. I don't know. Is am I wrong that that's sort of a part of like Fey mythology a lot as well? The idea of guest rights and that kind of thing.
Fey, Arthurian legends also has the honor of hospitality and all that. So
yeah. So well, and it turns out that whole scene, other than providing threat and dealing with this previous threat of was it Ron or Ran, the sea goddess that threatened him, dealing with that. It seems like the real crux of that whole scene was that's where they found out about the flighting, that Loki could theoretically be defeated in a flighting instead of fighting him. You could basically have a war of insults and defeat him that way. But Loki is, of course, the most eloquent insulter that has ever been. And so the only possible way you could do that is to get yourself Kvasir's mead. This mead that is the blood of... the blood of a god who was like the living pact between the giants and the Aesir? Am I remembering that right?
it was basically the Norses got spit and came out of Casimir.
Yeah. And so I'm just trying to remember that Kvasir was like the living embodiment of this peace treaty between the Aesir and somebody they were warring with. I can't remember if it was the giants or the Vanir or whoever. You know, they're Viking folks. They war with people.
Yeah.
So that was really the main point of that. But that's where they also met Magnus's grandfather, who helped them escape. And it was through him that they figured out that they've been working way too hard because they've been rowing this boat across the ocean, and he was the one that told them, you don't have to do that. You can just tell the boat where you want to go, and it'll sail itself there.
Because they didn't come with any instructions.
Right. Which also kind of feels like a fun, like, these are the kinds of things that I would enjoy throwing at a D&D party, right? Especially because like I think about adventures that I've run like Out of the Abyss or whatever, where there's a lot of travel, and after a certain point in these adventures, like the travel stops being a fun part of the game, and I just want to get them where they need to be without having to run the travel part, right? This feels like the DM has reached that point in the adventure where, okay, we don't need to deal with how you sailed across the ocean anymore. Let me reveal to you that you can just tell the boat to take you there, and it takes you there.
Right. Yeah, they learned that, and then they also, the grandfather would point at them in the direction of an ex or estranged wife. Is that correct?
Well, mentioned that he has ex estranged. I don't know that they ever like formally divorced or anything, but they were married.
I don't know how that works in Godland.
Right. Well, I mean, and that actually brings up an interesting thought. Like, clearly, Norse mythology is such that traditional ideas of marriage are not necessarily the norm amongst the gods, right? The idea that that they were married but just sort of never hung out together, and it's been thousands of years, and I guess they're not really married anymore, is a thing. But then there's also like Odin has, was it several wives, and but that also doesn't like, but also all of the dwarves, or many of the dwarves, are the children of Freya, and that was just not a big deal. So yeah, the one might say that Norse mythology or at least this depiction of Norse mythology paints the mystical world as being very hippie-ish, free love, sort of approach to relationships.
Well, any mythology, if you look in mythology, relationships are very complex and web. If you look at family trees and among the gods for different various types, you're not looking at a tree, you're looking at more of a web.
Sure, but like Hera would get pissed about it. The Norse gods are like, yeah, whatever, no big deal. So that feels like a difference to me. I don't know Greek mythology, I guess, that well to be able to say whether Hera's approach, or at least in those stories where Hera gets upset about it, is the norm or not. But so the grandfather, who's we keep just calling the grandfather, I think his name was Mjordi. Does that sound right?
Njord?
That was Nord.
Yeah. Njord.
Oh, okay.
So that's how it's spelled.
Well, I listened to it, so I don't know how it's spelled. Who ends up being like an interesting interjection of exposition, gives them some information, and also then we get to hear about his beautiful feet, because apparently he has incredibly beautiful feet, which is how he ended up married to this frost giantess, because she wanted to marry Balder, but for whatever reason, I think it was Odin made her choose based off of the feet. Look at the feet of the Aesir, and you can marry whichever one you want, but you can only look at their feet to determine who you want to marry. And so she did not pick Balder, who is the most beautiful of all the gods.
Apparently not enough beautiful.
Except for when it comes to feet. And so then they go to, at that point they go to England. And I'm trying to remember why they needed to go to England. I know they lost. Blitz and Hearth left at that point because they needed to find a whetstone. They don't know why they needed the whetstone, but they were explicitly told you're going to need a whetstone. All right, the DM, right, a different whetstone. The DM drops a random prophecy on him, a vision that said you need this MacGuffin. So, in order to get rid of these two characters, we're going to have them go find it, not retrieve it. They're just going to go find it, which seems a little bit silly because they found it at one of their dad's house. Like, it didn't come off like it was that hard of a hunt, but I think they needed to get, those two characters had a vacation planned and they couldn't make it to a few sessions, and so they found a way to sort of remove them from the game, right?
Yeah.
And the DM totally took the Gollum line of story to present the next challenge.
Which
eventually
for the stone
with the dad.
Oh yeah.
The dad is basically turned into
Gollum. Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember if they got to England before that, or I think it was after that. I think they went to England first, and then they went.
Yeah.
Because Blitz and Hearth weren't in England for that challenge. I still can't remember why. Like, there was a giant. Oh, because the giant knew where Kvasir's Mead was. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So they needed to go. They knew there was this giant in this English town that knew where Kvasir's Mead was. And so they needed to go talk to the giant to find that out. And the giant basically told them, I will tell you, but you have to beat me in a fight to the death first. Which seemed a little strange to me, because if you're fighting to the death, how are you going to tell them what? How are they going to deliver the prize, right?
Yeah.
And that's when we learn about Alex's
Yeah. Yeah,
history,
we get
right?
Alex's sort of history, her background, their background at that point.
And particularly that Alex's grandfather had this special connection with clay and found it to be a spiritual practice in addition to just making pretty things that people like to buy. Uh, Alex's father was more on the business end of things, and Alex took after the grandfather. And so Alex has part of the challenge. It's a dual challenge. There's the fight with the giant itself, and then the giant was also going to create basically a creature
Right.
or a second made from clay, and the seconds would then
Right.
fight.
So you fight one of them, and that's also where we got the backstory for TJ, Thomas Jefferson Jr. And so TJ had to fight the giant one-on-one, and then the clay golems that they created that night also then had to fight one-on-one. And Alex made one very much in the tradition of the Aztec, I want to say, that was their heritage, with the dual-faced clay statue.
And Pottery Barn.
In Pottery Barn, yes. And so I liked one of the things I didn't like as much in the first two books was that there were all of these what seemed to be interesting side characters, particularly the other Inheriar from his floor in Hotel Valhalla, that were kind of like introduced but never really like fleshed out as full-fledged characters. All of them were there for the entirety of the quest this time. All of them sort of each one had like a moment, a chapter, a bit of story, a scene where we got a little bit of the backstory for each one of them at this point. And this was TJ and Alex's moment where we got their backstory.
And TJ's big story was that it was the Civil War that he was a soldier in, right? And he had been kind of felt called out by someone on the southern side who had said some stuff in part because TJ is black. And he ended up taking that guy out, who also became an Inhari, right?
Inhari,
yeah. Yeah. And it caused this huge big fight as part of the war. But that is the moment that they both went to Valhalla.
But he's the son of, was it Tyr? And part of being a child of Tyr is that when challenged, he had to accept. He could not turn it down. In fact, I not only I remember specifically that he was part of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is the regiment that is depicted in the movie Glory, which I've watched many times. So that stuck out to me that he was part of that regiment. It was the first, was it all black unit, other than like those that were like conscripted that weren't really trained soldiers during the war. So yeah, that was his story, and then we got Alex's story, and that's also, I don't know if it was around then. Well, I think by the end of the second book, I had a pretty strong inclination that there was a potential relationship between Magnus and Alex at that point. And I think it was at this point that was really like solidified for me, right? That relationship between the two of them was made real. Like, I don't think he had any idea that that's where it was going, but I had a pretty strong sense that's
Right.
what was where this was going to end up at the end.
The other thing that's, I guess, is becoming more and more important is the fact that it is
Oh
Ramadan
yes.
Yes.
during this story, and so Sam has to fast both food and water during the days, uh, do do her prayers, and also can eat a lot at night.
And there
And
was there
oh,
was
go ahead.
concern at one point because Alex was teaching Sam like how to resist the call of Loki, because in the previous book Loki like ordered Sam to do stuff and Sam couldn't stop herself from doing it as a child of Loki. But Alex was, and so Alex was teaching Sam to do that, and there was concern that like, are you going to be weaker from the fasting during Ramadan? Is that going to make it harder for you to resist Loki? And I think like they didn't explicitly state this or not, but the way it was depicted, the fasting during Ramadan, I would say, was shown as making Sam more resolute, more increased her willpower, as a practice of discipline, and made her more capable of resisting Loki.
Basically, it's her fate
Right.
that she had powering and fighting off the resistance of an inner god. So,
And I think it's fair to talk about here, like in terms of, I have a few friends who are Muslim, and they often talk about how at the beginning of Ramadan, like it's sometimes a lot harder because you're just starting to again deal with not with fasting during the day. But near the end, it's often something that is a lot easier for them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
Yeah, I don't, it's interesting that he being the author, he was very clearly, I think, in this series trying to bring in a more diverse cast of characters than I recall there being in the Percy Jackson series anyway. Despite the fact that it's Norse based, right? He did the research to figure out why it makes sense for there to be a Muslim in the group, tied up into all of this. And then we have TJ, and then we have all sorts of interesting depictions of identity, gender, sexuality, and that kind of stuff in the story as well.
yeah,
So they defeat the giant in England. They defeat the ugly clay golem with their beautiful pottery barn as well. I enjoyed the depiction in this story of how all this crazy mystical stuff happens and nobody notices. Like there is a giant and two golems fighting a Civil War soldier in the middle of the town square. The giant explodes when it dies, and yet the people don't really notice that was all going on, right? There must have been some sort of gas explosion or something, right? But they kind of actually talk it over at the beginning. They established the ground rules a little bit at the beginning in the conversation with Percy Jackson, because the Norse folks are like, oh yeah, we call it this and this is how it works and whatever, and Percy and Annabeth are like, oh, we think of it like this and call it this thing in the Greek and Roman side of the mystical world or whatever, right? So I found that was interesting because I don't remember them really addressing that in the first two books of this series. I think they addressed it in something like the Percy Jackson series and whatever, but I don't think they had addressed it explicitly. But I found it interesting that not only did they address it, but then it came up several times as things were going on that people should have noticed that. So there was these moments where Magnus was like, huh, I wonder what all the people saw when that building was picked up and thrown across the battlefield or whatever, So they found out where Kvasir's meat is. It is being held by this other giant who made a deal with it with what was it, some dwarves, made a trade with some dwarves or whatever, got the last remaining bit of Kvasir's mead, and had it hold up in this one spot. And in order to find it, you need to go to is it Norwegian city of Flom,
No,
and
Norway.
take the train north, and you can't miss it. And so they head off that way, but that's when Blitz and Hearth come back and steal Magnus away to go get the whetstone, because it turns out the whetstone, because apparently all magical whetstones are in the possession of Hearth's father, who was a greedy big jerk that we met in the last book, who took the magical cursed ring in the last book, and that ring has now turned him into a ring dragon who's hoarding all of his wealth, and very much turned into a Gollum Smeagol situation where he talks to himself about himself, and but I'm hungry or I'm thirsty, let me go down to the river. No, you have to stay here and guard the treasure. All your neighbors want to come and take it.
That's just what they would want you to do, so they could sneak in.
Right. Exactly. And so they concoct some sort of plan, because Hearth has to make the difficult decision that, my father is gone. He's this evil dragon now. We have to kill him. And so but the only thing we have that could possibly get through the defenses of this dragon is Jack, Magnus's sword. But only if you strike it in the belly, and if you don't kill it the first time, you're not going to get your chance. So you can only really stab it once. But its blood is acid, and they crawl on their belly, so they never expose their weak underside. So this is the challenge. All right, PCs, figure out how you're going to kill this monster, right?
Excuse me, Mr. Ring Rat Dragon, sir, will you please just turn on your back?
Belly scratches. Belly scratches. There you go. So Magnus hides in a tunnel under the ground, but where there's not much ground between him and the surface. They coax the father dragon out, and so that Magnus can time it just right to stab up through the ground and then get out of there really fast, so that he's not sprayed with the acidic blood.
Yeah, they use his deceased brother to go out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't just any lore.
No, it was Hearth's deceased brother, and Hearth also regained the rune stone that was missing from his set of runes that was left at the place where his brother died. So all in all, I felt like the Hearth's story arc was on one hand heart-wrenching, and on the other hand it didn't feel like it had the oomph that it should have for all the stuff that happened, because they were there, the rune was missing right there. They were told, and Hearth admitted, I'm gonna have to come back and get this again someday, but you know what, let's just continue on with our quest and I'll work at half power. I guess I'll get it later, right? And then he got it, and the brother was kind of there, popped in, popped back out, was only there for just a quick scene, even though it seemed like a really big deal. So anyway, it happened, and it had some oomph, but I felt like it should have had more, given how tough that would have been.
Also, there was the whole thing about the sign that said, if you enter, you'll die. You'll be killed.
I think the local police put that on, yeah.
Right, yeah. But they describe the sign and say that, and then no local police. I was waiting for the local police to show back.
I figured that was because from the way they described the interactions with the police, because that's what took them so long to find the whetstone. They found it right away, and then they got arrested.
Right.
I figured that was sort of the local police's way of just not dealing with the problem. They didn't have any intention of enforcing that edict or whatever. It was just their way of oh yeah, you're right, there's something dangerous there. We'll put up a keep out sign, high voltage, stay away,
Right.
but we're not going to go check on it. Like, this is not our problem. So, Hearth then went through the process of cutting out the heart of his father / the dragon. He was real torn about whether or not to consume the heart, because apparently that comes with it, like, is it the memories? You learn the memories of the creature, the dragon, when you eat its heart. And he figured there was a lot of sort of personal family history there that could be carried on. But at the same time, his father was horrible, and he didn't necessarily want Dad in his head, right? But Magnus accidentally dropped the heart into the fire. It was destroyed, but in the process, tasted some of the blood. And didn't get any memories, but gained the ability to hear animals talk?
Especially birds.
I guess it was, wasn't it? Was it always birds?
I thought it could be more than
Yeah,
birds.
there were a few.
But I don't know for
There
sure.
were a few, because wasn't there a thing with goats when they were in Norway? Maybe I don't remember. Yeah, there was. There was a goat talking, because my son pointed out that now all goats are like Thor's goats that can talk. Odin. Yeah. So it was. I think it. Otis. Yeah. So yeah. Now he can just talk to animals, and that's also felt like a weird thing to add to the character this late into the story. I don't know. It felt like that could have just been a thing that he could do as a son of Frey. But I guess the character leveled up at that point after killing the dragon, and they needed to explain why he gained this new class ability.
Was he multi-class?
Yeah,
Multi-class.
took a level in Druid, and this is how they explained it.
Yeah.
And it's not like the talking to animals thing didn't come up, because it did come up later on when they were fleeing with Kvasir's mead. But so anyway, so they got the whetstone. They returned all that treasure to the dwarf, and the ring, the cursed ring, to the dwarf that they took it from. Or at least they threw it in the pond. They didn't actually know if that dwarf was still there, right? They just threw it in the pond where that dwarf had previously been shapeshifted into a trout or whatever and hiding. So,
Not my problem
right?
now.
I guess so, right? That's a weird. As I think about it, like, there could be a whole short story based off of somebody wandered along this pond 100 years later and found a cursed ring with a bunch of treasure, and isn't that how the Lord of the Rings started? Way back when with Smeagol found the ring in the river, right? Somebody's found a cursed ring and said, "This is not my problem," and threw it in the water.
Maybe it is the beginning
Maybe
of that
it
story.
is.
Somehow.
So then they get back to the rest of the crew, and they are sailing into Flom, which I like. The depiction of the description of Flom I found really really interesting. The river with the steep cliff sides, and then the city sort of built into the side of the mountains, and what have you, and the train going through it. And I'm like, that sounds really neat. I wonder if it's real. And so I looked it up, and it's a real place. It's an actual tourist attraction. The pictures looked kind of like that. I looked it up on my phone while I was listening to it with my son in carpool line, and so we were looking at pictures of Flom while we were listening to that part of the book talking about Flom. And that's where we got a little bit of the story of half-born Gunderson, who was originally a Viking from Flom. In fact, arguably, he's the only one of the entire group that was at one time a Viking. That it really has that Norse background. I guess maybe Magnus could have some Norse background. We don't really know, but with a name like Magnus, I just sort of assumed.
Is it kind of interesting at this point, because we're talking about people having Norse backgrounds or not, like that whole you were talking about earlier, the inclusivity and the diversity in this versus a mythology or a story base that has been sometimes, like particularly runes, have been used by white supremacists, and that juxtaposition is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you. I mean, I suppose you could tell a story of based in Norse mythology without discussion of runes. But runes are one of the things that people know about Norse mythology, right? So,
right, yeah.
So I don't know how you just completely avoid it, but I think, it is meaningful, I guess, that they incorporate the use of runes. They don't shy away from that, while also describing one of the more diverse sort of casts of characters, at least in a Rick Riordan book. So yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting. So in Flom, Flom was weird. They split the party, which is always tricky, but they do it all the time in this group, right? They're constantly splitting the party. It's like they've got a party of 10 players in their D&D group, but only 4 or 5 of them can make it to any given session. And so they split the party to search Flom to figure out what's going on or where to go next for Kvasir's Mead. And what's her name? Was it Madison? The redheaded in Harrier. Mallory? That sounds right. In any case, she saw the figure in Flom that, like, doing fortune tellings on the street or something, that was the figure. We get her backstory, right? She was in Ireland during the Troubles. She got in with a group that was fighting for Irish independence and set a bomb on what was supposed to be an empty school bus. And somebody that she assumed was Loki gave her these magic daggers and says, go disarm that bomb. Children are going to die. She did, but it blew up and she died. And that's how she became an Harrier and ended up in Valhalla. And so she saw that figure again that she had always thought was Loki, and it turned out wasn't Loki. It was actually it was Frigg, right? It was Frigg, who it turns out is Mallory's mother. But she didn't know that this whole time either, which felt or seemed weird to me, because when Magnus showed up in Valhalla and they had that first dinner or whatever with all the new Inheriar, isn't that when they announced who his father was to him? Am I remembering that wrong? That's how when he found out that his father was Frey?
Yeah, I think they always do it, son of...
Right. So how did Mallory not know that her mother was Frigg? So that was weird. But the other thing that was weird to me was that they followed her onto the train. They followed Frigg onto the train, had this conversation in this exposition moment with Frigg on the train, and then when they got all the information they needed, they just kind of stayed on the train and continued that part of the quest, right? They jumped off the train and they followed the path to where the mead was going to be found. And they made it a point back in England to highlight that certain characters were carrying cell phones for just this kind of occasion. The rest of the group was theoretically wandering all over Flom trying to figure out what to do, while these, 3 or 4 of them were off actually doing the quest. Why couldn't they have sent a quick text message and said, hey, we're on the trail, come meet us here? I don't know. But the story,
that reception,
right? And the story just kind of doesn't even describe it. Hand waves it away. Doesn't deal with it at all. It's just sort of, we're gonna run off. We're gonna do this thing, and we'll meet back at the boat. And then they just meet back at the boat, and everybody's there waiting for them, right? They get to they find the spot where the meat is. It's in this sort of vault, this cave, whatever, that's sealed up, and there's these thralls, these slaves that the giants keep, that are, they're constantly having, they can't take a break until they've harvested all the wheat, but they can't harvest the wheat because the sickles they have are always dull, and the wheat is super strong. And so they use the whetstone to sharpen the blades so they can finally take a break and tell them how to get into the vault or whatever. But then they were all like, "Oh, but we can't let you do that. We're gonna have to kill you now." But there was this whole thing about how you can't, like, they couldn't kill the thralls, and it was kind of, there was this moral thing of like, not only can we probably not kill them, but like we shouldn't. They're slaves. They're not here of their own volition. What do we do? And so they used the whetstone as a temptation or whatever to get them to fight over it, and then they all kill each other.
Yeah. Instead of doing anything, instead of them killing themselves, it's the slaves that
Right.
murder themselves, that kill themselves fighting over this.
Well, and this becomes a theme to a degree as well. Like, Magnus is, an Inheriar, one of the warriors of Ragnarok, but he's also the son of a god of peace. And so they oftentimes find a way for Magnus to be able to defeat the enemy without having to fight. Right? Even when Magnus does fight, he doesn't fight. He throws Jack in the air and says, "Hey, Jack, go kill him."
Yeah.
And then it just gets tired later.
Right. Well, and there was one time, and I'm jumping to the end a little bit, but there was one time towards the end where he did start to fight. Like, Jack was off fighting and he was fighting separately or whatever, but it didn't last long, and he didn't come off as that much of a fighter, right? So it's very much not Percy Jackson, right? Percy Jackson is the great hero that goes out with the sword and slays the monsters and defeats the evil gods and whatever. Magnus is very much like, I'm going to throw myself into these fights and then totally not do any fighting because that's not my thing, which is consistent with the son of a god of peace, right?
Yeah. It's Magnus fights like in video games how I play, where literally when I have a team, I let my team go fight. My computer team go fight while I'm trying to figure out what else is happening and exploring the area.
Right. So they defeat the thralls. Mallory, this is when her magic daggers come into place because it's the only blades thin enough to get into the door to cram it open. There's a giantess that's been trapped in there as punishment for letting Odin steal the mead, but the first time. And they make a deal with...
Yep.
Oh, go ahead?
I was going to say, that little bombshell gets dropped on them. That there's not even that much mead there because one of the Norse gods already has his own stash of it.
Right. Yeah, no, Odin, who sent them on this mission, already has all of this Kvasir's mead sitting in a storehouse somewhere. And they kind of mention this at the end, again, not to skip too far ahead, but at the very end of the story, Odin mentions during the celebration party that, you found Kvasir's mead and you used up all the rest of it. Now the only Kvasir's mead that's still left out there is my supply. And Magnus is like, of course he has a whole bunch sitting around. And could he have just given it to us? Yes. Could I bring this up with him? Sure, but what's the point? Like, it's not going to get me anywhere. So,
yeah, it's all done. It's
right.
Water under the bridge. We're just finished all this thing.
And it's very much there's also very much, I think, like, they needed to go through what they went through to be ready to do what they did at the end to win, right? So, and it's a D&D adventure, right? You needed to go through these side quests, otherwise you weren't going to be high enough level to fight the boss at the end. So they did. So they got the mead by making this deal with the giantess, and then the giantess said, "Well, that was nice, thank you, and I guess you're going to die now because there's basically an alarm spell on the vault, and as soon as you open the doors, the giant who owns it knew about it, and he's on his way, and there's these giant eagles." And so Magnus fights one of the giants with the help of some crows that he can talk to. This is where the talking to animals thing, like the one time it became particularly important. and then the rest of them ran off back to the boat to Flom, where Halfborn Gunderson defeated the giant because that giant had the audacity to insult his hometown of Flom.
Also, importantly, isn't this how don't they get back to the boat in the walnut?
One of them is in the walnut. Sam shapeshifts into a bird or whatever, and carries Mallory, who's in the walnut. Because we didn't even talk about the walnut. They were given a walnut. Who gave them the walnut? Was that Frigg? Yeah, Frigg gave them the walnut and said this.
Frigg gave them the walnut as to be able to trap Loki after the flight,
which actually comes up a few times. From that point they all get back together on the boat and they sail off to the crossroads between, was it Niflheim and I don't know my Nine Realms well enough. It was the crossroads between two different nine of the nine worlds, which is where Loki's boat is, and that's where they ran into Njord's estranged or ex-wife, the Frost Giantess, and that's when the walnut comes up there in a fun and interesting way. Like, well, I mean, even if you did survive, and even if you got to Loki, and even if you defeated him in the flighting, it's not like you can recapture him. What are you going to do? It's like, oh, we have a walnut. She's like, oh, okay, never mind. You're good then. Like, as if that made sense, right?
And
not so powerful.
She specifically wants to make clear that she does not want to get back with the grandfather.
Right. Not interested in getting back together with Njord, although he asked them to sort of take the temperature of the relationship. Was there a chance that she would take him back, whatever?
Which is frosty.
Yeah, you could say that, right? So then she gives them magic skis so they can ski down her mountain to where Loki is. Everybody starts a big fight except for Alex, Magnus, and was it Sam? Yeah, I think it was Sam that was with them. But they have one of Hearth's runes that they use, and it turns them invisible so they can sneak onto the boat, where they are then discovered and a fight begins, and they challenge Loki to the flighting, and Loki's like, no, I'm just going to kill you. And then the giant allies are like, no, you were properly challenged. You can't just say no. And so Loki starts insulting Magnus, and he starts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, literally physically shrinking away. And then Magnus remembers that his friends are the key to his victory.
Friendship is magic.
Friendship is magic. And so he starts, instead of insulting trying to use the eloquence of Kvasir's Mead to insult Loki, he instead uses this eloquence to talk up his friends, and all of these people are here, and they've done wonderful things, and they're loyal, and they're fantastic, and you don't have anybody. Nobody is loyal to Loki. And Loki's like, yeah, but like, I've still got my wife. She's loyal to me. And then he turned and saw that she had left. She was done with his BS. And so he was truly alone, and Loki shrunk to 2 inches high, and that's when they captured him in the walnut. And then proceeded to be attacked by all the giants. And so then he clenched his butt, and they jumped in the water, and they escaped on water horses.
As one
does. And then there was parties with gods, and they opened basically a halfway house or whatever out of his uncle's mansion in Boston. And Magnus and Alex became an official couple.
And I know you said there was parties with gods, but there was one other thing too, right?
Okay.
Was that the trial of Loki? As it was? I mean, it was only like probably...
Did they have a trial?
A few minutes.
I don't remember a trial of Loki.
They had to talk about... It wasn't really a trial. It was, what are we going to do about the situation?
Yeah, because there was because Thor was like, he's in the walnut, let's just smash it, kill him, and be done with it. But as is true to Norse mythology, you cannot stop Ragnarok. Loki has to survive. He has to be imprisoned in the exact way that he was previously imprisoned, because it has already been foretold that Ragnarok will happen, and it will happen. And Loki's escape from that prison is part of how it will happen. We didn't stop the end of the world here. We just delayed it. And that's sort of a theme in Norse mythology. Like, Ragnarok is going to happen. It is inevitable. They've never fought to stop the end of the world. They've just constantly fighting to make it not happen so soon. Right?
Right. And that's one of the key things, because I know we've called Loki the bad guy a few times, and he fits that role, but he's not necessarily a bad guy. It's just, as Magnus talks about a few times, a lot of people would like a little more time to live their lives, like Samira being able to marry. And so we just need to postpone Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm.
But wanting to start Ragnarok isn't necessarily evil either.
I mean, no. I don't know that I'm willing to say that Loki isn't necessarily a bad guy for wanting to start Ragnarok. I am willing to probably say that he is definitely a bad guy for other reasons, though. He has some fairly vile personality traits and qualities. It's not like he's just innocently like, I'm just playing my role. Nah, he's kind of a big jerk face. So I'm still willing to call him a bad guy, but.
Yeah, I know, but almost all of them are big jerk faces.
Oh no, that's true, and they kind of make that point as well in those final scenes, in those final chapters. They kind of make the point like all of the gods are kind of giant jerk faces, and Loki's playing his role, and they're playing their role, and they don't know how to do anything except play their role, in the tapestry of fate or what have you. There was also a moment. I don't remember when it was, but there was a discussion with some giants at one point that pointed out that like the Aesir, the Vanir, the giants, there's not really any different. They're all the same thing. They just sort of formed different groups over the years.
Different factions, different ideologies, that they're just fighting among themselves. But yeah, they could get along, but they chose not to. Well, their ideologies makes them go against each other.
Well, or their fate, right? Just like Ragnarok, they all have their roles to play, and they don't know how to do anything but play those roles. They are very much sort of enslaved to their fate and to their role, right?
Yeah.
And I've sometimes brought that concept into my D&D games as well. Like, the gods have their portfolios and they have their domains and they function within those and they play their roles, and they don't really, like, unlike the mortals who can sort of, the players can sort of make their own way and determine their own fate. The gods are incapable of doing that, with a few possible exceptions of gods who used to be mortals, and so maybe they've got some freedom or not. So I've definitely played with that idea in campaigns before.
It's a concept of more power you have, less choice you have of how to apply that power.
And the whole idea of Norse Ragnarok, I feel like, is more poignant than maybe I've given it credit for in my mind in the past. Because, like, isn't that true of everybody always at all times? Like, we're all going to die. The earth is someday going to be swallowed up by the sun. Like, this whole thing, this whole experiment that is life on earth is doomed. And there's no stopping it. There's absolutely nothing that can be done about it. We're all, we're all inevitably headed towards that same end. But that doesn't mean that we just sort of shrug and give up and say, okay, then I guess now's the time, right? We're all sort of constantly struggling to make the most of the time that we have and to get ourselves the most time that we can. And pushing, making sure that we can make a life for ourselves, even though, it's going to end in a few billion years for all humanity. But, and probably much sooner for most of us. And I don't know, unless somebody has any particularly good last thoughts, I feel like that's nice and poignant to wrap up our conversation on, right? We're all going to die, but let's make the most of it.
Well, can we just say the people making most of it are Alex and Magnus with their house to help
Heck yeah.
the homeless youth of Boston?
Heck yeah.
Hmm.
And I like that they didn't shy away from that moment because Alex is gender fluid, and Magnus has some magical ability to always know whether Alex is male or female at any given moment. And this is why I would say he, and then she, and then they, because Alex doesn't really use the they pronoun. But in any given conversation, I don't know whether to refer to them as he or she, right? Because
Well, you actually see it in the book because since it's always from the viewpoint of
Right.
Magnus, Magnus knows instantly, and thus the pronoun for Alex is written.
right. Well, and the pronoun changes in the audio. I mean, you hear him switch back and forth. But I like that they didn't shy away from that moment after the fight, because the first time Alex and Magnus kissed, Alex was identified as female, and then the relationship kind of started in moments when Alex identified as female, and then after it was all done and they were back in Valhalla and they kissed again, Magnus had that mental conversation of, but Alex is male now, and I just kissed a dude, and you know what? I guess it doesn't matter because it's Alex, right? It's not about male or female. It's about that this is the person that I'm into. So,
And I think he said he had to think about it a little bit about, like, to unpack it a little bit more later or to process it more.
right.
But it was that was a nice moment in terms of thinking through that stuff, and also like we didn't really talk about it, but on the way to the last frost giants, the ex-wife of the grandfather, like they were going through the extreme cold, right?
Yeah.
And part of the way that they got there was through the Alex and Magnus kind of like huddling
everybody
together.
paired up and conserved body heat by huddling up together as they trudged across the cold, and he and Alex were together, and that's what the first time they kissed, because Alex is like, well, if we're gonna die, I don't want to die without having done this.
Yeah. And I think going back to your thing about the pronouns, it is one of the difficult things because it can be difficult to remember which gender Alex is at a particular time in the book. So talking about it later, it's sometimes hard to know which pronoun to use.
All right. Should we go ahead and wrap up then?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and call that the end of the episode. It is time to say goodbye and say thanks to all of our patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show, and anyone else who otherwise supports the show or adds to our community.
And if you'd like to contact us, you can email us at thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can call our biz line. It's 919-BIZTOME, BIZTOME. You can talk to me on Twitter at SarahDarkMagic or at SarahDarkMagic.com. Jeff is at Squatch, SQUACH. Eric is at Eric MPAC, Eric with a C. And The Tome Show is at The Tome Show. You can find us on Facebook, Patreon, and Discord. Watch our stream of episode recordings at twitch.com/tomeshow, or watch the video after the fact on the Tome Show's YouTube channel. Show notes and other great shows are at thetomeshow.com.
And it's twitch.tv, not .com, but yes, twitch.tv/tomeshow. That's okay. That is our thoughts on The Ship of the Dead. Up next in June, we will be reading Dragons of Spring. Is it Dragon or Dragons? I forget if it's plural. Dragons of Spring Dawning by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, because we are going to force Tracy to finish the Dragon Eyes trilogy. So there we are. Until then, keep turning the page, Tomites. And the end.
Woohoo.
All right.
Your nail broke?
Should I stop the stream? Say goodbye to folks. Hi, Freddie.
Bye, stream.
Bye, folks.